Hey, how's it going, Universe? Shaun here from Zoobox, and today we're getting fancy. We're going international. We're going to be talking about 1960s Eyes Without a Face, or if you're a Frenchie, Les Yeux Sans Visage, which is the original French title. Yeah, this is a French movie. This is from the Criterion Collection. This is important. This is an important movie. I had never seen it before. So I was like, hey, let's do it. Let's check that box off. The film was directed by Georges Franju. It's adapted from a novel of the same name by Jean Redon, by Pierre Boulleau. It stars Pierre Brasseur, Alida Valli, Juliette Manel, and Edith Scoob. The plot synopsis here, or the little log line on IMDb, is a surgeon causes an accident which leaves his daughter disfigured and goes to extremes to give her a new face. Now, the most interesting thing, if you want to put this in the context of the time it came out, was this was a time for horror and thrillers where they were kind of beginning to be elevated. Just a few contemporary movies that came out the same year as this actually was Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and Mario Bava's Black Sunday, which you've never seen. Black Sunday is kind of like a gothic horror movie. It would feel very traditional today, but at the time, it was most movies, horror movies especially, had this habit of kind of emulating the studio horror movies, the Universal Pictures era, the monster movies, which are all great movies, by the way. I really like them. But 30 years later, the genre hadn't evolved a ton. And Georges Franju actually said that he did this purposefully to elevate the genre. That's what he wanted to try it. It was like a challenge for him. Because this movie was lambasted by critics. Audiences were not super keen on it. It wasn't until years later it kind of gained a cult following and became a respected movie. And I think a lot of that has to do with the subtext of the film. The subtext of the film is about beauty standards and who imposes beauty standards and what that means to you as a person. What does it mean to be ugly? What does it mean to be pretty? What does your inner self mean if your outer self doesn't reflect it? So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on, and it's, I think, a reason why the movie over time has endured. It's not, well, I said endured weird. Endured. That's why it's kind of gained its notoriety in the later years. I mean, even when it came to America, it wasn't even released in its full form, which is crazy because it was already only like a 90-minute movie. And it was called The Horror Chamber of Dr. Faustus, which there is no characters named Dr. Faustus. So it was just kind of almost just trying to ape the things of the time or other kind of movies, kind of get away for Americans to go see a French film. It wasn't until I think sometime in the 2000s that the full version was released in America. They released it for a short run in theaters because it's got very provocative imagery. Like if you see the poster, if you see stills from this movie, they're very provocative and they're very creepy in a weird way. One of the main characters, the woman, the Eyes Without a Face woman, the woman in the mask. The mask is a very effective piece of imagery, and that's really honestly what got me to watch the movie. I had never seen it before, and I was like, I had always seen the poster, and I had always been kind of intrigued. And what intrigued me was the picture of the woman in the mask. I think they kind of did a remake of this, or kind of a spiritual remake of it. The Skin I Live In with Antonio Banderas. I believe it's a Mexican film or Spanish-speaking film from a few years ago. I've never seen that either. I actually really wanted to see that as well. It's got kind of a structure that you will be familiar with. Like I said, a lot of films ape those kind of universal eras, and this is kind of in a kind of a broad way a Frankenstein story. You have the mad scientist who's the father. He's got like an Igor character, like his helper, this woman that helps him, and then you have the victim, or you have the woman. What's her name? Edith Scoob. You have her. So they kind of fit that mold. And as the story goes, that's kind of what it is very similar to. That's what it's about. It's about identity, and it's about trying to live when you feel like you're a monster, and how does your like I said, your interior life, does it mean anything if your exterior visage, if your features are not the same. Like, what is beauty, and what defines a beauty standard, and who defines it, and who pushes it on who? Because as the story kind of unfolds and as it goes along, it's really more about how the father feels and how this woman that helps him feels, about how they feel about beauty standards and how important that is. Apparently, his helper, he had successfully done this surgery. Oh, and what the surgery is he kidnaps women and he cuts their face off and he tries to put it on other people's faces. A real face off. Kind of like Face Off, except not as fun. and it really becomes about them. It really becomes about their intentions, because Edith Scobe rather, she's kind of a passive character. She's kind of along for the ride. She's insecure. She's afraid. She's not very pushy or demanding. I don't even like her as a character. She's kind of a little bit of an empty vessel. And that's why I think it's appropriate to kind of include her in the victims of the film, because she becomes a victim of a perspective, of an imposition of these beauty standards. And I think it's talking about kind of the stuff that people have been talking about, at least in this country, for the past about 30 years, right? With the kind of the second wave feminist movement and what it means to be a woman. I mean, that's something that's going on right now. Embroiled. If you look it up, J.K. Rowling is getting in tons of trouble for saying something not really that controversial. But I think it's an interesting conversation. And like I said at the beginning, like that is why I think the movie stands the test of time. It's directed pretty strongly, though. I will say that. It's got a vision. It's a beautiful looking movie, too. Shot compositions, a lot of really interesting stuff going on there, a lot of layers. It's definitely a movie I'm going to have to revisit sometime. Something I'd probably revisit in the near future. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. And what I also loved about it is that it does have like this sense of being French specifically. There are things that kind of don't jive well, that we would find to be odd juxtapositions of like scenes happening in music. Like there's this playful, almost like French circus music whenever the helper woman, whenever like the Igor character is like out on the hunt for the new face. She's kind of out there scoping the scene, doing some people watching, and then she kind of seduces people to come back to the surgeon's house under the guise of having like a room to rent. So yeah, it's a really interesting movie, and if you've never seen it, I would definitely recommend it 100%. I haven't seen a ton of French movies, to be honest with you. It's kind of a blind spot I have. I'm a fan of international cinema. I'm a big fan of Japanese movies. I'm a big fan of Korean movies. Big fan of Italian movies, actually. Seen a lot of giallo horror movies and whatnot. Mario Bava, like I said, Black Sunday. That's a movie that I saw as a young kid. I haven't seen it in a long time, though. I should probably revisit that. It's kind of like Dark Shadows before Dark Shadows, but not as corny, not as soap opera-y. But yeah, and I really, really appreciated the movie. I appreciated the conversation. It gave me a lot to think about, actually. And the movie doesn't hold your hand. It doesn't explicitly tell you these things. It's one of these adult movies, one of these fucking rare things nowadays, that just kind of lets you read into it what you want to read into it, experience the story. There's enough specific things there. I think if you're a halfway intelligent person, you'll pick it up. I don't think it's that hard to figure out what this movie's about. It wasn't made at a time where they were doing things with that kind of subtlety. And I think that's kind of the point. It's, it's supposed to be kind of an allegory. It's like a morality tale. Which is what all good horror and good science fiction kind of does. It should be something that reflects ourselves, our human nature, so we could learn something from it. And it packages those kind of lessons, those values, in a way that is more palatable to people. Because, when you proselytize, nobody likes listening to that. Nobody likes listening to that. That's the problem we have in modern culture and modernity. Yeah, fancy words. That people, subtext has just completely disappeared. Everything's just spoken. If the characters do not explicitly make like fucking statements, then nobody gets what's going on. It's the most frustrating thing as like a modern film fan. It really is. And back then, they couldn't do that. That's the whole thing. They couldn't do it. They had to seed it into the subtext. It had to be there underneath the surface because people they had to get things past censors and whatnot, And and I appreciate it for that. I really do. It's because, necessity is the mother of invention. And they do a lot of interesting, cool things. There's even there's a few scenes that, for at the time, were very shocking. Apparently, it's one of those movies where people were fainting, getting pulled out of the theater when it premiered because they were so disgusted by the surgery scenes. There's actually a really well done scene where when they're cutting off the girl's face. It's pretty bloodless. It's not really, by 2020 standards, it's not crazy. It's pretty tame, but I could see that at the time. Nobody having ever seen anything like that, like how they might react. They might react, extremely. But they were in France. I mean, what the hell? People are supposed to be enlightened. What's the deal, Frenchies? What's going on? Yeah, but it had me curious to check out more of this Georges Franju's films. I don't know if I'll get a chance to. I looked for a few of them, and they don't seem to be streaming anywhere, which, that is the way it goes, That's why everybody wants to adopt all these streaming services. It's like, oh, why buy physical media? I'm like, that's why. Because it ain't all there. And then if it is there, hopefully it hasn't been fucked with. That's my new bugaboo. That's my bugaboo right now. Sorry. Yeah. Les yeux sans visage. Great movie. I'm glad I watched it. I'm glad I took a chance. It's not just it's a movie that I think transcends the time capsule nature of watching a movie like this. It felt just as relevant, just as interesting. I didn't feel like I have to make caveats because of the time it was made. It's kind of a lot like the movie I mentioned right at the beginning, Psycho, right? You don't have to make caveats about Psycho. Psycho is just a good movie. It's just well made in a universal way. No pun intended. But it's one of the greats. And this movie, I think, while it does not rise to the level of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, or any Alfred Hitchcock movie for that matter, I think it's definitely in that company of movies that kind of feel timeless and feel relevant always, and they grow with you. There's a lot to get out of this movie if you're willing to take the chance. If you're willing to do the deep dive and you're really willing to think about it and seriously watch it. Put down your phones, close your fucking laptops, and watch Eyes Without a Face. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening and watching. If you want to know more about Zoobox, you want to see these daily videos, you want to make sure you see them every day, hit the subscribe, hit that bell. Check out the links in the description. There's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's my own personal Twitter. You could become a Twitter head with me. We're always talking nonsense on Twitter. Twitter is the spiciest place on the internet. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. All right, goodbye.